so this one's going to be a little bit of a rant. I do not understand. Okay, so I get somebody, and I'm looking at this case, and it was a few years ago, but it just spurred up because somebody asked me to do something similar recently, and or actually consulted because they were wondering if that was possible. So anyway, so I got a case quite a few years ago, and they wanted me to do CBT. And I love it when people come in and they say, hey, look, this is what I worked on before. This is what I would like to do. Totally get it. So CBT is cognitive behavior therapy, right? And so I'm like, okay, well, great. What worked for you? You know, what did you like about that? Because CBT is a very hard intervention. You really have to be cognitive to be able to do this. Well, back then, yes, it kind of, they were like, well, I liked, to talk about, how I was thinking, and that how my thoughts were affecting my emotions and stuff. And I go, that's totally cool. And I was like, so which one was your favorite technique? And that's where they were like, well, to address that I was saying things wrong. And I'm like, okay, well, what is wrong? Because I actually don't believe anybody's wrong. I don't believe anybody was developed wrong, but they couldn't answer. I was like, are you sure you're not doing narrative? But they don't know the therapeutic interventions. And this is why it's very careful which therapist you go, because you really, if you're looking for therapy, you need to actually have a therapist. There's a separate licensure for that. And that is one that is closer to, that they literally are closer to doctors in therapeutic interventions. You have social workers, you have school counselors, you have actual counselors. Counselors have a license that say counselor. Right? Therapists have license that say therapist. They're closer to psychologists that are therapeutic. Psychologists are not psychiatrists, so you got to get the terms all different. So psychiatrists are about medication. Psychologists, depending on what their psychology degree is in, are they able to do it? But therapy are all about interventions. So this is where I get to understand when they come into my office who actually they were working with. And most of the times we end up repairing shit that they did because they did it wrong, because they were doing something that they thought that they could do, but they didn't. And this whole ethics, like sometimes really seriously. And so I was like, okay, well, why don't you tell me what's going on first and why you thought you needed that intervention? So then they tell me that, they had some hiccups, and that they've always, kind of had self-inflating, deflating thoughts, and that they just felt really shitty all the time. And I'm like, okay. And I said, so then I start looking at their environment, because, biopsychosocial. And then I realized, well, this is why, your parents call you stupid, like on a regular basis. So I could see where you can believe that. I mean, you would think. So I go back to attachment style. And I'm like, okay, CBT. I don't know if I need really CBT. And so I was like, well, why don't we do something different? And they were up for that, because I went straight to EFT, which is emotion focused. And Sue Johnson does a really great job, because all they need to do is have some compassion with themselves, and love for themselves, and realize that everybody has their own point of view, and that maybe they were trying to be helpful, but they weren't really helpful. But then they have to realize that their parents have to own their own stuff. And then not all the time do we have to carry that burden. So recently I got asked again, and I was thinking, well, what are we looking at? And so I started looking, and I was like, come on, why are we keep doing this? CBT is a very hard intervention. It's not like it's made for everybody. It's not the one shoe fits all, but it is great when it comes to data. Like, we can collect a lot of data from that, because it's formatted in a way, and it's more straight shooter, I guess you want to say. I mean, it's like you do a cognition and boom, your thought is dictating a behavior that comes inside of it. Yeah, like I take one step, your body moves. Now that we can get really in depth with that, but that's how data could be ran, is I thought it, I do it. So if I think it differently, it's going to be done differently. But there's so much more entail into that when we come to an biological, psychological mainstream. But that then we're getting really nitty picky. And so anyway, so I go back to this case, and then I started looking, and I was like, well, can this person even do it? Cognitive? I mean, cognitive, you have to be cognitive. Like, you literally have to be aware of your thoughts and how that thought can actually be some player in what's going on in your life. And if you, and that's where I stopped, because I was like, okay, wait, do we have, what are we looking about? And so this one actually is not cognitive enough. Like, the data shows that in terms it would have been closer to deficient. So basically disabled mentally. Why the hell would you do that then? Like, and just because it's the mainstream. So too much WebMD, TikTok, I would jump on that and say, okay, well, let me talk to this family. But this was a social worker and a behaviorist that was asking for it. And I was thinking, see, this is why you shouldn't do these. You definitely need to consult with somebody that's a little bit more trained in therapy. But you need to actually listen, because they actually are planning on doing this. And I'm going to see it go so disastrous. I am voicing that it's wrong, that you shouldn't do it. But they're not held by ethical standards. So I'm wondering who's going to be the CBT person, because they need to be holding themselves up to ethics, and they shouldn't be doing it to somebody that's not. It's actually more disastrous to do it, to force that intervention on somebody that actually is physically and mentally unstable enough or unable, because they're cognitively are on the line of retarded is what they used to call it. Like, the data over and over, I've had it retested, and I said, okay, well, now test it one more time, and it's the same freaking numbers since what they were 8, I think. Okay, come on, we're an adult. The numbers haven't changed. They're not cognitively enough. So stop doing it. Stop forcing something on somebody that doesn't mean it. This is what the system does. That's it. Pay attention. Not all the time do you need to have the interventions. Listen to the specialist. Sometimes we know. It's like you go to a hairstylist, you ask them their advice. You don't tell them how to do the cutting. If that's the case, then you should have done the cutting.